a study in self-respect, family betrayal, and the cost of standing your ground. The morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my kitchen, casting long shadows across surfaces that represented years of sacrifice and deliberation. I stood at my marble breakfast bar at 27 years old, holding a cup of coffee brewed in an espresso machine that had cost $3,000, and allowed myself a rare moment of uncomplicated pride. My name is Daisy, and I had constructed my entire adult life on the foundation of relentless self-improvement, professional achievement, and meticulous financial planning. The apartment that surrounded me, this sanctuary in Austin with its carefully curated furniture, premium appliances, and thoughtfully designed spaces, represented the tangible manifestation of everything I had built independently, without family assistance, without inherited advantages, without anyone's permission or approval. Every dollar spent on this apartment had been earned through my own effort. Every appliance had been researched exhaustively, compared meticulously, and purchased only after I had confirmed it aligned with both my practical needs and my long-term vision for the space I inhabited. The espresso machine alone had consumed months of my careful consideration. I had read dozens of professional reviews, compared specifications across competing brands, waited for seasonal sales, and ultimately justified the expenditure based on the reality that I used it every single day. The cost per use, calculated over several years, made it a rational investment rather than an extravagance. This was how I approached every major purchase, with the same methodical analysis I brought to my work in the biotechnology industry, where I served as a research coordinator at a prestigious firm. My career had been my primary focus for the past 5 years. I had invested in my education, earning my graduate degree through a combination of scholarships and student loans that I had systematically paid down ahead of schedule. I had positioned myself strategically within my organization, volunteering for challenging projects, developing expertise in clinical trial protocols, and building a reputation as someone who delivered consistently excellent work. My colleagues respected my competence. My supervisors trusted me with increasingly complex responsibilities. Within the hierarchical structure of my workplace, I had earned genuine authority and influence based entirely on the quality of my professional contributions. The contrast between how I was perceived at work and how I was treated at home had never been more apparent than on the Tuesday morning when my father arrived unannounced at my apartment. He had let himself in using the spare key I had provided years earlier, during a period when I still believed that family relationships operated on principles of trust and mutual respect. He moved through my apartment with the casual entitlement of someone who viewed the space as partially belonging to him, as though his genetic contribution to my existence granted him proprietary rights to my personal sanctuary. He settled onto my marble breakfast bar, the same spot where I had stood that morning feeling proud, and proceeded to sip coffee from the espresso machine he was about to dismiss as unnecessary. His eyes conducted a thorough inventory of my kitchen, a systematic visual assessment that concluded with his pronouncement that expensive appliances were wasteful for someone in my situation. The phrase he used was deliberately calculated to diminish, "You don't need expensive appliances since you're single." The casual shrug that accompanied his statement suggested he had simply articulated an obvious universal truth rather than expressing a personal opinion. It was the kind of dismissal that had characterized our relationship throughout my entire life, a pattern of subtle invalidation that had accumulated into something far more corrosive than any single harsh word could achieve. I felt the familiar tension rise in my chest, the sensation of my own feelings becoming simultaneously too large and too insignificant. I forced my facial expression into an approximation of a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes, and I felt my fingers tighten around the ceramic coffee cup I was holding. The pressure I applied was unconscious, a physical manifestation of the emotional pressure I was experiencing internally. He continued speaking as though my nonverbal response had invited him to elaborate, rather than suggesting that I might disagree with his assessment. He explained that appliances were wasteful for a single woman, but that, when I eventually married, such purchases might make more sense. He gestured around my kitchen with a vague circular motion, as though the entire space represented an exercise in excessive self-indulgence rather than a carefully considered personal investment. "I bought them because I wanted them, Dad," I said, and I could hear the edge beginning to creep into my voice despite my efforts to maintain composure. "I work hard. I deserve nice things." I had made this statement before, at various points throughout my life, and it had never quite penetrated the particular stubbornness with which my father held his convictions about how people like me should behave. He seemed oblivious to the tension in my voice, proceeding instead to elaborate on what he apparently considered the more compelling matter, my brother's upcoming wedding. "I'm just saying," he continued, with that particular inflection that transforms the phrase into something closer to, "and let me explain why your perspective is not only wrong, but also foolish. Your brother is getting married next month. He and Vanessa are moving into their new house. They actually need quality appliances for entertaining, for building a family. You're just one person." There it was. The comparison that had served as the central organizing principle of our family dynamic throughout my entire existence. Patrick, my older brother by 4 years, had achieved the status of what my parents considered a successful adult trajectory: engagement, marriage, property acquisition. The fact that he had drifted through 3 different careers without establishing himself in any of them, the fact that he had been rescued repeatedly by our parents' financial intervention, the fact that his primary accomplishments consisted of existing and accepting help, none of this seemed to diminish their celebration of his life choices. Meanwhile, I had pursued an entirely different path. I had put myself through university, accumulating the scholarships that had minimized my student debt and working part-time jobs that had supplemented my education. I had selected a graduate program based on genuine intellectual interest and career potential, rather than on the basis of family recommendation. I had landed a position at a major biotechnology firm that placed me in a professional environment where my competence was recognized and valued. I had built a life that reflected my own values, my own aspirations, and my own careful planning. None of this achievement seemed to matter within the context of my family's value system. Where I saw independence and accomplishment, they perceived coldness and self-centeredness. Where I saw reasonable boundaries, they identified ingratitude. My father's reference to my singleness was particularly revealing. He had articulated something that lived beneath the surface of many comments I received from my family, the assumption that my marital status diminished my legitimacy as an adult deserving of respect and consideration. The fact that I was building a life alone, that I was making autonomous decisions about my own space and my own finances, that I was not deferring to a partner's preferences or organizing my existence around someone else's needs. This was apparently a temporary condition that should inform how others treated me, a deficit that should be acknowledged and corrected through their intervention. "Patrick is an adult," I said, attempting to redirect the conversation toward some foundation of logical consistency. "He can buy his own appliances." I knew immediately that this was a futile approach. Logic had never been the language through which my family conducted their interpersonal negotiations. My father's expression hardened in response to my suggestion, and he articulated the phrase that had haunted me throughout my entire life: family helps family. He followed this with an observation about my fundamental character flaw. "Daisy, you've always been so independent, so cold about these things. Your mother and I worry about you." The word struck like a physical slap. Cold. I was cold because I had maintained boundaries around my own emotional labor and my own material possessions. I was cold because I had declined to hand over everything I had, worked for the moment someone else requested it. I was cold because I had learned, through years of careful observation and painful accumulation of evidence, that the only person I could genuinely rely on was myself. I had learned that my parents' love was conditional on my willingness to prioritize their comfort over my own needs, on my willingness to accept being overlooked and undervalued, on my willingness to make myself smaller and quieter and less demanding. "I need to get to the office," I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. "I have a presentation at 9. My father simply nodded in response, but made no move to leave. He sat comfortably on my bar stool, apparently intending to remain in my apartment indefinitely. "I'll lock up when I'm done," he said casually. "Your mother wanted me to measure your windows for those curtains she's making." I hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, I should have recognized the warning sign, should have trusted the subtle internal alarm that was beginning to sound. Something about the situation felt profoundly off, about his casual presence in my space, his unstated intentions, his confidence in my compliance. But I was already running late, and the presentation I was giving to our department heads about new clinical trial protocols had consumed weeks of my working life. I had invested significant intellectual and emotional energy into the development of this presentation, and I could not afford to be distracted by whatever my father was planning, could not allow the growing uneasiness I felt to prevent me from fulfilling my professional obligations. "Fine," I said, grabbing my work bag from the counter. "Just make sure everything is locked when you leave." He raised his coffee cup in a gesture of acknowledgement, and I walked out of my apartment, the uneasy feeling following me all the way to my car like a persistent shadow I couldn't quite shake. The morning traffic through Austin was predictably terrible, giving me far too much time to think, too much space for my mind to wander and process the morning's conversation. My father's words circled in my consciousness, mixing with older memories that I had accumulated over decades of family relationships. I remembered my university graduation ceremony, an event that had represented years of effort and sacrifice. My parents had attended, but they had left my ceremony early before the conclusion of my section of the graduation procession in order to attend my brother's amateur basketball game. I could still see the moment when I had looked into the stands and realized they were no longer there, could still feel the particular hollowness that had replaced the pride I had been experiencing just moments before. I remembered the Christmas when I had paid off my student loans ahead of schedule, a significant financial accomplishment that had required years of disciplined saving and careful budgeting. I had announced this achievement proudly, expecting recognition of the personal sacrifice and dedication it represented. My announcement had been met with lukewarm congratulations, followed immediately by a shift in the conversation toward my brother's new girlfriend, toward a new relationship that had existed for approximately 3 months and was presented as though it represented a significant life development, worthy of extended discussion and family attention. I remembered countless other moments throughout my life where I had achieved something I considered significant: academic honors, professional milestones, personal goals I had set and accomplished, only to be met with responses that ranged from distracted acknowledgement to active dismissal. The implied message was always consistent. My achievements were interesting only insofar as they reflected credit on the family, only insofar as they validated my parents' parenting decisions, only insofar as they could be incorporated into conversations with their friends. When my accomplishments could not be easily categorized within their social aspirations, when they represented values that deviated from their expectations, when they prioritized my own satisfaction over some other family member's need, they were simply not valued. The other consistent theme in my family interactions was the question of when I would settle down, when I would find a partner, when I would cease being single and therefore cease being somehow incomplete or temporary in my adult status. Every significant achievement in my professional or personal life had been met with this implicit or explicit question: but when will you find someone? as though my singleness was an unfortunate obstacle to be overcome, rather than an active choice I had made, as though my life could not possibly be considered successfully constructed until it included another person, as though my worth and accomplishment were somehow dependent on whether a man had chosen to commit to me. I had learned to stop expecting recognition from my family. I had learned to celebrate my victories in private, to find satisfaction in my own assessment of my worth rather than seeking external validation. I had learned to construct meaning from my professional achievements and my personal relationships with people who actually valued me. But it still hurt. That was the aspect of being the overlooked child that nobody bothered to mention in all the self-help literature I had occasionally read. You could understand the dynamics intellectually, could even forgive them rationally, could acknowledge that your parents were probably doing their best, given their own limitations and psychological constraints. But the hurt never quite went away. It simply changed shape, transformed into something harder and more crystalline, something that informed all your interactions with them from that point forward. My office building rose against the Austin skyline in all its glass and steel promise, a monument to professional aspiration and achievement. I had fought for my position within this organization, had proven my value through sheer competence, through long hours invested in learning the systems and protocols, through consistently delivering work that exceeded expectations. I had positioned myself so thoroughly that I had become genuinely indispensable to several key projects. My colleagues respected me not because I was friendly or sociable. I was competent, but I maintained professional boundaries that some interpreted as aloofness, but because I was reliable and I delivered. My supervisor trusted me with increasingly important projects, giving me opportunities that other coordinators were not offered, because she had observed through repeated interaction that I was capable of managing complex responsibilities and producing excellent results. Within this professional environment, I was not the cold, overly independent, emotionally withholding daughter who didn't appreciate family values or understand the importance of putting others' needs before my own. I was simply someone who was good at my job, someone who understood the technical aspects of clinical trial design, someone whose work was valued and whose contributions mattered. This was my element. This was where I belonged. This was the space where my worth was measured accurately and recognized appropriately. The presentation I delivered that morning went well. I fielded questions from the department heads with confidence and clarity, watching them nod as I explained the protocol modifications that would improve our trial efficiency by a conservative estimate of 30%. I had spent weeks researching and analyzing the existing processes, had identified inefficiencies through careful observation and data analysis, and had designed solutions that were both practical and evidence-based. This was my element. This particular space where my intelligence and analytical ability were not just valued, but actively sought out, where my contributions shaped organizational decisions, where my voice carried weight and authority. Afterward, as the department heads were filing out of the conference room, my supervisor Judith stopped me in the hallway outside my office. Judith was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and brilliant, the kind of woman I had aspired to become since my first day at the organization. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that suggested she knew her value and did not require external validation to maintain her sense of worth. She had achieved significant professional success through a combination of competence, strategic positioning, and an absolute refusal to diminish herself for anyone's comfort. "Excellent work in there," she said, and I could hear genuine approval in her voice. "The board is going to love this. You're positioning yourself very well for the senior coordinator role." Pride bloomed warm in my chest, spreading through me like a physical sensation. This was genuine recognition, the kind that came from someone whose judgment I trusted, someone who had observed my work firsthand and was offering her assessment based on actual evidence. "Thank you," I said. "I've been working toward that." I had indeed been working toward that position for years, had been strategic about the projects I selected, had invested in developing expertise that would distinguish me from other candidates. The senior coordinator role represented not just a promotion, but a significant shift in my professional authority. It would place me in a position of genuine responsibility, with influence over organizational decisions and professional autonomy that I did not currently possess. "I know you have," Judith said, and something in her expression suggested that she understood more than just the surface-level career ambition. "That's why you're going to get it. Keep doing what you're doing." I returned to my office after our conversation ended, feeling considerably lighter than I had felt that morning, when my father's dismissive comments about my appliances had started my day off on a discordant note. In the context of Judith's professional validation, my father's perspective seemed smaller, less significant, less capable of diminishing what I had actually built. I allowed myself to sit with the pride and satisfaction I was experiencing, to acknowledge that I had achieved something genuinely impressive, to accept that my work mattered and was recognized by people whose judgment was sound. Let my father think my appliances were wasteful. Let my parents prioritize Patrick's material needs over mine. Let them construct their narrative of my coldness and ingratitude. I had built something here, within this professional environment, that had nothing to do with them, something they could not diminish or take away, something that could not be stolen or dismissed or replaced with inferior substitutes. I stayed late at the office that day, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of work that had always been more comfortable to me than navigating family relationships. The documentation surrounding the clinical trial protocols required careful attention to detail, and I found the systematic process of organizing information and refining processes to be deeply satisfying. It was nearly 7 in the evening when I finally packed up my things and headed home, the drive back to my apartment giving me time to decompress from the day, but also providing space for the morning's conversation to creep back into my thoughts. I thought about how I had saved for years, literally years of careful budgeting and prioritization, to furnish my first apartment, to create a space that felt like home, that felt like me, that reflected my aesthetic preferences and my values. I thought about how every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen, researched, assessed for quality and durability and alignment with my vision. I thought about the contrast between my systematic approach to building my life and my brother's approach of simply accepting whatever assistance was offered, of drifting through professional opportunities without genuine commitment, of relying on my parents' financial intervention to smooth over the consequences of his own poor decisions. I thought about the years of working overtime, of skipping vacations that I could have taken but declined so that I could allocate those resources toward my financial goals, of brown bagging my lunches rather than eating out with colleagues, of making countless small sacrifices that accumulated into the ability to purchase quality appliances that made my space feel genuinely like home. The appliances had been the crown jewel of these efforts, the moment where all the accumulated sacrifice and planning came together into something beautiful and functional and genuinely mine. The complete set had cost $18,500. This figure represented the combined cost of a top-of-the-line refrigerator with a touchscreen interface and a sophisticated ice maker, a high-end 6-burner gas range with convection capabilities, a premium dishwasher with multiple wash cycles, the espresso machine that had started that morning's conversation, a wine cooler that maintained precise temperature and humidity controls, and a microwave that offered far more functionality than its budget-friendly alternatives. All of these pieces had been selected to match one another aesthetically, creating a unified design aesthetic in stainless steel that conveyed both elegance and functionality. Together, they represented not just appliances, but an investment in my quality of life, in the pleasure I experienced in my own home, in my right to surround myself with beautiful things that also functioned excellently. I had researched each piece for months, reading professional reviews from sources that understood the technical specifications and design considerations, comparing warranties and after-sales service, waiting for the precise moment when various sales coincided to maximize my purchasing power. When the appliances had finally been installed 6 months ago, I had stood in my kitchen and felt something I rarely allowed myself to feel: pure, uncomplicated happiness. There was no anxiety about the cost, no guilt about indulgence, no worry about whether I deserved to have nice things. There was simply the pleasure of seeing something I had envisioned come into being, of creating a space that made me happy every single time I walked into it. My father's words echoed again as I pulled into my parking spot. "You don't need expensive appliances since you're single." The phrase made me angry all over again, made me confront something I had been trying not to fully articulate. My singleness did not diminish my deservingness. My unmarried status did not reduce the value of my income, or my labor, or my right to make choices about how to spend the money I earned. The fact that I did not have a partner did not mean that the space I inhabited should be treated as temporary, as provisional, as somehow less worthy of aesthetic investment than the space Patrick and Vanessa were constructing. I pulled into my designated parking spot and grabbed my work bag from the passenger seat. The building's elevator was functioning at its usual glacial pace, giving me time to check my phone for messages. There was a text from my mother. "Dad says your apartment is beautiful. So glad he could visit today. Don't forget about the engagement party this weekend." I typed back a non-committal response, something vague about possibly attending, though I had already decided that the engagement party was an event I would rather avoid, and pocketed my phone. The engagement party. Yet another event dedicated to celebrating my brother's mediocrity. Another gathering where I would be expected to smile and congratulate him and his fiancée. Another moment where I would stand on the sidelines, feeling invisible while people praised Patrick for achievements that barely qualified as such. The elevator doors opened on my floor, and I walked down the familiar hallway, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. I stopped in front of my apartment door, key already in hand, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt it immediately. Something was profoundly wrong. The silence was wrong. The emptiness was wrong. My eyes scanned the kitchen, taking in the horror piece by piece, detail by detail. The espresso machine was gone. In its place sat a battered old coffee maker that looked like it had been purchased at a discount store, the kind of device you could acquire for under $20, something that belonged in a college dormitory rather than in my carefully curated kitchen. The beautiful stainless steel gleam that had characterized my kitchen was nowhere to be seen. I moved further into the space with growing panic, taking inventory of each new loss. The wine cooler was gone, replaced by a scratched-up mini refrigerator that looked as though it had been pulled from someone's garage during a renovation project. The refrigerator, my gorgeous smart refrigerator with the touchscreen interface and the ice maker that had cost nearly $3,000, was gone. In its place stood an ancient white model, dented on one side, humming with an irregular rhythm that suggested mechanical problems. I yanked open the oven door with shaking hands, almost afraid of what I would find. Not my range. This was some cheap electric model, a significant downgrade from the professional-grade gas range I had owned. One of the burners was visibly damaged, discolored in a way that suggested it had not worked properly in some time. I gripped the counter, feeling my knees weaken, feeling bile rise in my throat. Every single appliance I had saved for, worked for, carefully chosen through months of research, all of it was gone. Stolen from my own home, by my own father, and replaced with garbage as though I wouldn't notice, as though I didn't deserve better, as though my things were interchangeable with trash, as though the violation of my trust and my property was acceptable, as long as some kind of functional replacement was left behind. My phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I answered, and my voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as my own. "What did Dad do?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and in that pause, I knew. I knew with absolute certainty that my mother was about to confirm what I had already pieced together. "Oh, honey," she said, in that bright, deflective tone she used when she knew she was in the wrong but planned to brazen through it anyway, to pretend I was overreacting, to transform my legitimate anger into evidence of my emotional dysfunction. "We were going to tell you tomorrow. Your father picked up your appliances this afternoon. Patrick needs them for his new house, and you don't really need such expensive things. You're just one person." The repetition of that phrase, "just one person," cut through me like a blade. This was not an explanation or a justification. This was a fundamental statement about how they viewed me, about my reduced status, about the diminished claim I had on things I had purchased with my own money. "He stole from me," I said, each word precise and cold, measured out carefully so that I would not lose control of my voice, so that I would not allow the rage I was feeling to become hysteria they could dismiss. "He came into my home and stole $18,000 worth of my property." "Don't be dramatic," my mother said, and her tone sharpened, shifted into the voice she used when she was becoming defensive, when she realized she might actually have to defend an indefensible position. "We're family. We help each other. Your father left you perfectly functional replacements. You won't even notice the difference." I looked at the ancient refrigerator, at the damaged stove, at the discount coffee maker that probably didn't even function properly, and I felt something crystallize inside me, some essential transformation that had been building for years, finally reaching a breaking point. "You had no right," I said. "Patrick is starting a family," my mother continued as though I hadn't spoken, as though my objection to being stolen from was irrelevant compared to my brother's need for quality appliances. "He needs quality appliances for entertaining. You can manage just fine with what you have. When you get married, we'll help you upgrade. But right now, this is what makes sense." The condescension in her voice, the absolute certainty that she knew what was best for me, the assumption that my needs were temporarily suspended until I achieved the relationship status they deemed appropriate, filled me with a cold fury that I had never quite felt before. "I'm calling the police," I said. My mother laughed, actually laughed. The sound was so unexpected, so inappropriate to the situation that it momentarily stunned me into silence. "And tell them what?" she said, her tone dripping with contempt. "That your father borrowed some appliances? Don't be ridiculous, Daisy. You always overreact to everything. This is exactly why you're still single. You can't see beyond yourself." She had gone for the ultimate weapon, had implied that my refusal to accept theft was somehow connected to my relationship status, had suggested that my inability to be stolen from without consequence was a character flaw that explained why no man had chosen to commit to me. The cruelty was so precise, so calculated to hit the exact tender spots of my insecurity that it achieved an almost perfect wound. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the device onto my hardwood floor. I stood in my violated kitchen, trying to process what had happened, trying to integrate the reality that my family did not simply prioritize my brother over me. They had actually stolen from me, had violated my trust, had treated my property as though it belonged to them, and were now attempting to gaslight me into believing that my anger was evidence of my psychological dysfunction. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a family disagreement about boundaries or communication styles. This was theft, pure and simple, dressed up in the language of family obligation, wrapped in justifications about helping Patrick, presented as though I had somehow consented to this violation and was now being ungrateful for the privilege of being stolen from. The front door opened behind me without warning, causing me to spin around. For a moment, I thought my father had returned, perhaps to defend his actions or explain himself, perhaps to attempt some kind of reconciliation. But it was Patrick who walked in, that familiar cocky grin on his face, that expression of entitlement that I had come to recognize and resent. "Hey, sis," he said, looking around my apartment with the kind of casual assessment that suggested he was evaluating his own property. "Mom said you might be upset. I wanted to come talk to you before this got blown out of proportion." "Get out," I said, my voice low and controlled, each word carrying weight through sheer force of will rather than volume. He held up his hands in mock surrender, the gesture suggesting that I was being unreasonable, that my anger was disproportionate, that he was a reasonable person attempting to engage with someone who was not being rational. "Come on, don't be like that. I just came from our new place. The appliances look amazing. They're going to be perfect for when we host Vanessa's family. You should see how the refrigerator fits in our kitchen layout. It's like it was meant to be there." Something in his tone, the casual entitlement, the complete lack of awareness of what he had taken from me, the absolute certainty that I should be happy for him despite the personal violation I had just experienced, snapped something fundamental inside of me. "Those appliances were mine," I said, and I could hear the anger creeping into my voice, rising despite my efforts to maintain cool composure. "I saved for 2 years to buy them. You have no right to them." "Dad said you wouldn't mind," Patrick said, his expression shifting to one of confused innocence, the kind of expression that suggested he was a victim of circumstances rather than a willing participant in theft. "He said you told him it was fine, that you wanted to help us out." "That's a lie, and you know it," I said. He shrugged and settled onto my couch, with the casual entitlement of someone who was planning to stay indefinitely, someone who felt no sense of intrusion in my space, someone who believed my home was as much his as it was mine. "Look, I get that you're upset," he said, his tone shifting into the patronizing register he used when he believed me to be irrational. "But this is what family does. We help each other out. You make good money. You can buy new appliances whenever you want. Vanessa and I are just starting out. We need the help." "You're 31 years old," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to maintain calm. "You have a job. You could have saved for your own appliances just like I did." "It's not the same," he said, and something in his tone suggested that he genuinely believed this, that he had constructed a narrative in which his needs were more legitimate than mine because he was attached to another person, because he was building a life with someone else, because his future involved partnership while mine only involved solitude. "We have a mortgage, wedding expenses, all kinds of costs you don't have to worry about. You're just one person in a one-bedroom apartment. We're building a life together." There it was again, that phrase that had become the central weapon in my family's arsenal. Just one person. As though my singleness made me less deserving, less important, less real. As though the life I had built meant nothing because I had built it alone. As though there was something incomplete or temporary about my adult status until some man had agreed to share it with me. "I want my appliances back," I said clearly. "Tomorrow, or I'm calling the police." Patrick laughed, that same dismissive sound my mother had made, the sound of someone who believed I was bluffing, who believed I would not actually follow through, who believed that my anger would fade and I would eventually accept the theft and move on. "The police?" he said. "For what?" "Dad has a key. You gave it to him. He came over. We moved some appliances around. There's no crime there. And good luck explaining to a judge why you're trying to get your own brother arrested for accepting a gift from your father." "It wasn't Dad's gift to give," I said. Patrick leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest in a gesture that suggested he was settling in for a longer conversation, that he believed he had constructed a legal defense that would hold up under scrutiny. "I'm not so sure about that. You might want to think carefully before you make this a big thing. Mom and Dad have done a lot for you over the years. It would be a shame to ruin your relationship with the whole family over some appliances." The threat was barely veiled, fall in line, accept the theft, or face being cut off from your family entirely. It was the same pattern that had played out my entire life, escalated now to a genuinely criminal level. Accept being stolen from or lose what little family connection remained. Accept violation or be accused of destroying the family. Prioritize your parents' comfort over your own dignity or be labeled selfish. Get out of my apartment, I said again, and this time I did not phrase it as a request. Fine, he said, standing and heading toward the door. But think about what I said. Is this really the hill you want to die on? Is it worth destroying the family over a refrigerator? He left and I locked the door behind him, then went further and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I trusted nothing about my family anymore. They had proven themselves willing to come into my home, to take what they wanted, to violate my trust and my space, and to feel entitled to do so. They had demonstrated that the only way they understood love was through compliance, through accepting whatever they decided was best for me, through making myself smaller and quieter and less demanding. I called Victoria, my best friend who worked in the legal department of a pharmaceutical company, someone who had been my emotional anchor through numerous family difficulties. She answered on the second ring, apparently aware from my tone that something was seriously wrong. I need a lawyer, I said without preamble. A really good one. Someone who handles theft and family law. What happened? She asked, concern flooding her voice. I told her everything, from my father's morning visit to Patrick's threats, from the replaced appliances to my mother's laughter, from the implications that I was being ungrateful and unreasonable to the suggestion that I should simply accept the theft and move on. By the time I finished my narrative, she was silent for a long moment. This is bad, she finally said, but it's also straightforward. What they did is absolutely illegal. The fact that your father had a key doesn't give him the right to take your property, and the replacement with cheaper items doesn't mitigate the theft. If anything, it shows intent. Patrick said I couldn't prove anything, I said. Patrick is an idiot, Victoria responded bluntly. Do you have receipts for the appliances? All of them, I confirmed. Digital and paper. Photos of the original appliances in my apartment, too. I thought about the housewarming party I had thrown 6 months ago, how I had been so proud to show off my kitchen. Dozens of photos, actually. I posted some on social media. Perfect, Victoria said. And witnesses who can testify that your father took them without permission. I don't know if anyone saw him take them personally, I said, but the building has security cameras in the hallways and the elevator. Even better, Victoria said. I'm texting you the name of my friend Gregory. He's a litigator. Handles property disputes and family conflicts. He's expensive, but he's worth every penny. Tell him I sent you. He owes me a favor, so he'll at least do a consultation for free. Thank you, I said, feeling the first small spark of hope since I had walked into my ransacked kitchen. I really can't thank you enough. Daisy, Victoria said, her voice shifting to something gentler, more cautious. Are you sure you want to do this? Your family is going to fight back. It's going to get ugly. I looked around my apartment at the cheap replacements for my beautiful appliances, at the violation of my space and my trust, at the evidence of a betrayal that could not be explained away or minimized. I'm sure, I said. I'm done letting them treat me like this. Then let's make them pay, Victoria said. I hung up and immediately emailed Gregory, laying out the situation in clear, unemotional terms, presenting the facts without allowing emotion to obscure the legal issues at stake. Then I went through my apartment systematically, photographing every cheap replacement, documenting every scratch and dent, creating a visual record of the damage and the diminished quality of what had been left behind. I pulled up my social media and downloaded every photo I had ever posted of my kitchen, creating a digital archive of what my appliances had looked like before they were stolen. I gathered receipts, warranty information, installation records, every piece of documentation that could prove what I had owned, what I had paid for it, and that it was now gone. If my family wanted to treat this like a war, then we would have a war. But it would be a war fought on my terms, with lawyers and evidence and the full weight of the law behind me. They had made a terrible mistake. They had underestimated me, something they had done repeatedly throughout my entire life. But this time, the cost of that underestimation would be real. This time, there would be consequences. The next morning, I woke at 5 o'clock despite having barely slept more than a few scattered hours. Every time I had closed my eyes, I saw my father's casual shrug, heard my mother's dismissive laugh, replayed Patrick's threats and false concern. The anger had settled into something colder overnight, something more focused and dangerous, the kind of rage that does not burn itself out, but instead crystallizes into determination. I made coffee in the terrible discount machine that had replaced my espresso maker. It tasted like burned water, like the product of cheap materials and poor engineering, which somehow made everything about the situation worse. I sat at my breakfast bar, the same spot my father had occupied the previous morning when he had begun this entire violation with his judgment about my appliances, and waited for my phone to ring. Gregory called at 7:30 a.m., his voice crisp and professional, all business. "I've reviewed the information you sent," he said. "This is absolutely actionable. Can you come to my office at 10 Estoboao? I'll need to discuss strategy with you in person." "I'll be there," I said. When I confronted my parents at their house an hour later, I had decided that they deserved to know that I was not going to accept their theft quietly, that I was not going to fade into compliance, that I was actually going to fight back. They were eating breakfast in their sunny kitchen, completely unconcerned, apparently operating under the assumption that I would eventually see things their way, that I would acknowledge that Patrick's needs outweighed my own, that I would accept being stolen from because maintaining family peace mattered more than maintaining my dignity. My mother looked up from her grapefruit with mild surprise at my unexpected arrival. "Daisy, what are you doing here so early? Don't you have work?" "I called in sick," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "We need to talk about what Dad did yesterday." My father sat down his newspaper and turned to face me with the kind of expression that suggested he was addressing an inconvenient emotional outburst from his daughter, rather than a serious confrontation about criminal behavior. "If you're here to make a scene about the appliances, you can save your breath. What's done is done. Patrick needed them more than you did." "You stole from me," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage that was building beneath the surface. "You came into my home with a key I gave you in trust, and you stole $18,500 worth of my property. That's a felony." My mother's expression hardened. "Don't be so dramatic. We gave you replacements. You're not without appliances. Your father left you with perfectly functional—" "You gave me junk worth maybe $500 total," I interrupted, "and most of it doesn't even work properly. The oven's burner is broken, the refrigerator leaks. The dishwasher won't close right. These are not acceptable replacements. These are damage control after a theft." "So we'll get them fixed," my father said irritably, as though the mechanical problems were simply an afterthought, an inconvenient detail that could be easily remedied. "You're making this into a much bigger deal than it needs to be. Patrick needed quality appliances for his new house. He's starting a family. You're just one person who apparently doesn't appreciate family values." The final phrase, "just one person," contained everything about how they saw me. My singleness was not a neutral fact about my relationship status. It was evidence of my incompleteness, my temporary nature, my reduced deservingness. "I want my appliances back," I said clearly. "Today, or I'm pursuing this legally." They both laughed, actually laughed at the prospect of me taking legal action against them. "With what lawyer?" my father said. "Do you know how expensive it is to sue someone? By the time you pay legal fees, you could have bought new appliances twice over. You're not thinking straight." Patrick needs them more, my mother repeated, as though this phrase were a universal truth that should end all discussion, as though my brother's need for entertaining appliances outweighed my right to keep the property I had purchased. He's getting married. He's buying a house. He's building something real. You need to support your brother instead of being selfish about some kitchen equipment. The words hit like physical blows, each one a reminder of every time my achievements had been minimized, my feelings dismissed, my worth questioned. I had graduated at the top of my class. I had built a successful career in a demanding field. I had saved and planned and worked for everything I had. And in my family's value system, none of it mattered. None of it ever would matter. "This conversation is over," I said. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." My father stood, and I watched his expression harden into something I had not seen very often, actual anger directed at me. "You threatened me with lawyers in my own house after everything your mother and I have done for you. We put you through school. We supported you. We gave you every opportunity. And this is how you repay us by attacking your own brother over some appliances." "You didn't put me through school," I said, my voice shaking now with barely controlled rage. "I had scholarships and student loans that I paid off myself. You came to my graduation for 20 minutes before leaving for Patrick's basketball game. You've supported Patrick his entire life while I got nothing but criticism for being too independent, too cold, too selfish." "That's not true," my mother said, but her voice wavered, suggesting that on some level she recognized the truth of what I was saying. "It's completely true," I said, "and I'm done pretending otherwise. I'm done being the overlooked child. I'm done watching you give Patrick everything while telling me I don't deserve basic respect. You stole from me. You violated my home, and you're going to face consequences for it." I left before they could respond. My hands were shaking as I drove away from the house I had grown up in, away from the place where I had learned that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned and re-earned, and would never quite be enough, where Patrick was celebrated for mediocrity, while I was criticized for excellence. Gregory's office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and modern furniture. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an air of barely contained intensity. He listened to my story without interrupting, taking careful notes occasionally, his expression remaining neutral and professional throughout. When I finished my narrative, he set down his pen and leaned back slightly. "This is cut and dried," he said with the kind of confidence that comes from years of handling exactly this type of case. "Your father committed theft. The fact that he had a key is irrelevant. The property was yours, purchased with your money, documented with receipts. He had no legal right to take it. The replacement with inferior goods doesn't mitigate the crime. If anything, it demonstrates consciousness of guilt. He knew what he had done was wrong, which is why he tried to cover it up with substitute items." "My brother said I couldn't prove anything," I said, testing his confidence against Patrick's assertion. Gregory smiled thinly, the expression suggesting that he had encountered many people who had no understanding of how legal evidence actually functioned. "Your brother is wrong. We have your receipts, your photographs, your social media posts showing the appliances in your apartment. We'll subpoena your building security footage showing your father leaving with the items. We'll document the current state of the replacement appliances, their age, their condition, the repairs they require. This is an easy case to prove." "What happens next?" I asked. "We file a police report for theft. We file a civil suit for the value of the property plus damages. We get a restraining order preventing your father from entering your property, and we make it very, very expensive for them to have done this to you." Hope bloomed in my chest, warm and bright and real. For the first time since I had discovered the appliances were gone, I felt like I was not facing this alone, like I had actual power to address what had been done to me. "How long will this take?" I asked. "Depends on whether they fight it or settle," Gregory said thoughtfully. My guess is that once they realize we're serious, they'll try to settle quickly. People who steal from family members usually rely on their victims being too intimidated or too guilty-ridden to pursue legal action. When you call their bluff, they tend to fold fast. "I want to pursue criminal charges," I said, "not just civil." Gregory studied me for a moment, his expression shifting to something more cautious. "That's going to make this harder on you. Criminal charges mean involving the police, the district attorney. It means your father could face jail time. Are you prepared for how your family will react to that?" I thought about my mother's laugh, my father's shrug, Patrick's threats. I thought about 27 years of being treated as less than, of having my accomplishments ignored and my needs dismissed. I thought about coming home to find my beautiful kitchen ransacked, replaced with junk, violated. I thought about the casual entitlement with which they had stolen from me, the dismissal with which they had responded when I expressed anger, the attempts to gaslight me into believing that my anger was evidence of my dysfunction. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared. I'm past the point of being unprepared. I need them to understand that there are actual consequences for this." "Then we'll pursue both criminal and civil," Gregory said. "I'll draft the police report for you to file today. I'll also prepare a demand letter to your father, requiring the return of the appliances within 48 hours or we escalate. Are you ready for this to get ugly?" "It's already ugly," I said. The police report was filed by noon that same day. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic to my situation, but clearly uncomfortable with the family aspect of what had occurred. She asked me multiple times if I understood that this could result in criminal charges against my father, asked me repeatedly if I was sure this was what I wanted to pursue. Her repeated questioning suggesting that she wondered if perhaps I might change my mind, if perhaps I would decide that family loyalty should outweigh legal consequences. "I understand," I said each time she asked. The answer never varied. I did understand exactly what I was setting in motion. The demand letter was delivered by courier at 2 p.m. Gregory had drafted it to be maximally intimidating, while remaining technically accurate and professionally presented. It contained detailed descriptions of the theft, estimated values citing the purchase receipts I had provided, citations of relevant criminal statutes, and a clear timeline for compliance. Return the appliances within 48 hours or face immediate legal action on both criminal and civil fronts. My phone started ringing at 2:15. My mother first, then my father, then my mother again. I didn't answer any of the calls. Then Patrick called 3 times in rapid succession. I sent every call to voicemail, not ready to engage in conversation with any of them, not willing to allow them to attempt to persuade me or manipulate me or shame me into backing down. Finally, a text from Patrick. "You're really doing this over appliances? You're going to destroy this family over a refrigerator." I typed back, "You destroyed this family when you stole from me. Return my property." His response came immediately. "They were gifts from Dad. He can give gifts to whoever he wants." I typed, "They were my property that he stole. 48 hours." I silenced my phone and went back to work, or at least I attempted to. Focusing on clinical trial protocols while my family was imploding was nearly impossible, but I forced myself to concentrate, to push through the emotional turmoil and maintain professional functionality. This job, this career was mine. They couldn't take it from me. They couldn't diminish it. No matter what happened with my family, I still had this, a professional identity that was separate from my family dynamics, a sense of competence and value that did not depend on their recognition or approval. Judith stopped by my office at 4 p.m. She seemed to sense that something was disturbing my usual professional composure. "You okay?" she asked. "You seem distracted." I debated lying, then decided against it. I owed myself honesty, and I owed Judith the respect of being truthful with someone who was showing concern for my well-being. "Family issues," I said. Nothing that will affect my work. Do you need some time off? She offered, the suggestion indicating that she understood family crises could sometimes require temporary removal from the workplace. No, I said. Work is the only thing keeping me sane right now. She studied me with those sharp eyes that seemed to see more than surface-level performance. I've been where you are. Family can be the most toxic thing in your life if you let them. Whatever you're dealing with, don't let them make you doubt yourself. Thank you, I said, meaning it deeply. Her words, coming from someone I respected, helped me maintain perspective about what was actually happening, helped me remember that I was not crazy for pursuing legal action, that I was not cruel for refusing to back down. That evening, I stayed late at the office again, partly to finish the work that had accumulated during my emotional distraction, and partly to avoid going home to my violated apartment, to avoid confronting the cheap replacements for my beautiful appliances, to avoid sitting alone with my thoughts in a space that had been invaded. When I finally did return home, I checked the locks 3 times and wedged the chair under the door handle again. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. I had given my father a key to my home as an act of trust, and he had violated that trust in the most fundamental way. The key was no longer welcome. The access he had enjoyed was now revoked. My phone had 17 voicemails. I sat on my couch and listened to them in chronological order, each one more revealing than the last. The early messages from my mother were dismissive. "Daisy, this is ridiculous. Call me immediately. We need to talk about this lawyer nonsense." My father followed. "You're making a terrible mistake. Family doesn't sue family. Call this off before you do permanent damage." Then Patrick, attempting a more conciliatory tone, "Sis, come on, let's talk about this like adults. There's no need to involve lawyers." But as I progressed through the voicemails, the tone shifted and the messages grew increasingly vicious. My mother's 6th voicemail. "How dare you file a police report against your own father? What is wrong with you? Are you trying to send him to jail over appliances?" My father's 8th voicemail, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You're dead to me if you don't drop this immediately. I will not have my own daughter treating me like a criminal." Patrick's 11th voicemail, his characteristic cockiness returning. Now that he believed the upper hand had shifted. "You know what? Fine. Keep the cheap appliances. See if I care. But don't come crying to me when you're old and alone and wondering why your family wants nothing to do with you." The later voicemails were my mother crying, begging me to reconsider, insisting that I was tearing the family apart, that this would kill my father, that I was being selfish and cruel and heartless. The accusations accumulated: selfish, heartless, cold, ungrateful. The same words I had heard throughout my entire life, now weaponized to make me back down, to make me accept being stolen from, to make me grateful for the violation of my home and trust. I deleted all of the voicemails without responding. Engaging with them would only provide my family with an opening to argue their case, to attempt to persuade me that I was wrong, to deploy guilt and shame as tools to manipulate my behavior. The next day at work, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "From Vanessa." I opened it with some trepidation, uncertain what my brother's fiancée might have to say about the situation. The email was surprisingly generous. "Dear Daisy, I hope you'll forgive me for reaching out like this. Patrick doesn't know I'm writing to you. I wanted to say that I understand why you're upset about the appliances. If someone took my things without asking, I would be upset too. But I also wanted you to know that we didn't know they were taken without your permission. Your father told us you had agreed to gift them to us as a wedding present. We never would have accepted them if we had known the truth. Patrick is angry right now and your parents are scared. But I think if everyone could just talk calmly, we could resolve this. I've seen your apartment on social media. It's beautiful. You clearly worked hard for everything you have. I just hope we can find a way to fix this without destroying the family. Please call me if you want to talk. Best, Vanessa." I read the email 3 times, searching for manipulation or hidden agenda, searching for something that would indicate this was an attempt to get me to back down. But it seemed genuine. Vanessa genuinely hadn't known that my father had stolen from me. The question was whether Patrick had known or if he had believed the same lie. I forwarded the email to Gregory with a note. Fiancé claims they were told the appliances were my gift to them. Thoughts? His response came within minutes. Doesn't matter. Your father had no authority to gift your property regardless of what he told them. But this gives us leverage. If they truly believe they were gifts, they'll have no reason to fight returning them. Stay strong. That evening, I came home to find a package outside my door. No return address. I brought it inside cautiously, half expecting something terrible. Inside was a photo album. My baby book, actually, one my mother had kept and apparently decided to use as emotional leverage. A note was tucked into the first page in her handwriting. So you remember that you were loved once. The passive aggression was stunning. The note implied that I was the one who had forgotten about love, as though I was the one who had violated trust, as though I was the one who had stolen and lied and laughed about it. I flipped through the album anyway, looking at photos of myself as a child. There I was at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. There at 10, holding a science fair trophy with obvious pride. There at 16 in my graduation gown. My mother had documented it all, had kept these memories, had presumably loved me once. What had changed? When had I become the cold, selfish daughter who didn't deserve respect? Or had I always been seen that way? My accomplishments recorded for posterity but never truly valued. My feelings consistently deprioritized compared to my brother's needs. I closed the album and set it aside. Nostalgia was a trap designed to manipulate me into backing down, into believing that the love that might have existed in the past somehow excused theft in the present. My phone rang. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. Daisy? It was Patrick's voice, but different from usual, uncertain, carrying a weight that suggested something fundamental had shifted. Can we talk? Just you and me, about everything? Against my better judgment, I agreed. Patrick arrived 20 minutes later, looking worse than I had ever seen him. His usual cocky confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like shame, or perhaps the weight of genuine remorse. Thank you for seeing me, he said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. I didn't invite him in. I was not ready to make that gesture of trust. You have 10 minutes. Vanessa told me she emailed you, he began without preamble. She wasn't supposed to, but I'm glad she did. Daisy, I swear to you, I didn't know Dad took the appliances without your permission. He told me you had agreed to gift them to us for our wedding. He said you wanted to help us out. I studied his face, looking for the lie, trying to determine whether he was being truthful or whether this was an act designed to manipulate me into backing down. I believed him, I said coldly. Even though I had never mentioned anything about it to you directly, even though I had just bought those appliances 6 months ago and posted about how proud I was to afford them. He flinched. I didn't think about it that deeply. Dad said it was settled. I trusted him. And when I told you they were stolen, when I was clearly upset, you threatened me instead of questioning whether Dad had told you the truth, I continued. I know, he said quietly. I was defensive. I didn't want to believe that Dad would do something like that. It was easier to think you were overreacting than to accept that he had lied to both of us. He didn't lie to both of us. He used you. He took my property and gave it to you so he could claim it was a gift. You were his shield. Patrick's face crumpled. I know that now. Vanessa made me see it. She said no parent who actually respects their child would put them in that position. She said Dad made me complicit in stealing from you. He looked down at his hands. The appliances are still in boxes in our garage. We never installed them. Vanessa wouldn't let me. She said something felt wrong about the whole thing. I thought she was being paranoid, but she was right. Hope flickered in my chest, small but real. Patrick still had the appliances uninstalled. This meant I could recover what had been taken. "What changed?" I asked. "Yesterday you were threatening me. Today you're offering to return them." Patrick looked down at his feet, seeming to struggle with the answer. "Yesterday I listened to my lawyer friend, Kevin. He said you'd never be able to prove anything, that family disputes don't hold up in court, that you were just being dramatic. But then Vanessa made me actually read your demand letter. She made me look at the criminal statutes you cited, and she said if I didn't make this right, she was calling off the wedding." "She what?" I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. "She said she wouldn't marry someone who would steal from his own sister and then threaten her for trying to get her property back. She said she had seen who I really was and how I treated you, and she didn't like it. She said I could either fix this or lose her." I had never met Vanessa more than a handful of times, but in that moment, I loved her fiercely. Loved her for seeing what was right and pursuing it. Loved her for refusing to enable my brother's worst impulses. "She's right," I said. "You should fix this." "I want to," Patrick said, and his voice broke slightly. "But Daisy, there's something else you need to know. Something I overheard that made me realize how bad this really is." My stomach tightened. "What?" "I went to Mom and Dad's house this morning to confront them about lying to me. They didn't know I was there. I let myself in with my key, and I heard them on the phone in the kitchen. They were talking to Kevin, the lawyer friend I mentioned. They were laughing." His expression hardened as he relayed what he had overheard. Dad said, "I can't believe she actually fell for it." And Mom said something about how I was always too trusting, too naive. Then they talked about how even if you sued, it would take years and cost more than the appliances were worth. They were treating the whole thing like a joke, like stealing from you was funny. Then I overheard them laughing on speakerphone about how I fell for it. Something inside me crystallized into something diamond hard and unbreakable. The betrayal I had already felt transformed into absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. "They set this whole thing up," I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "The morning visit to measure windows, staying in my apartment all day. It was planned." "I think so," Patrick confirmed. "And I think they counted on you backing down because you always back down, because you're the responsible one. The one who doesn't make waves, the one who values family peace over your own feelings." He was right. That was exactly what they had counted on. My entire life I had swallowed my hurt, accepted being overlooked, made myself small to avoid conflict. They had stolen from me, assuming I would do the same thing again, assuming I would prioritize family peace over my own dignity. "I'm not backing down," I said. "Even if you return the appliances, I'm pursuing the criminal charges against Dad. He needs to face consequences." Patrick went pale. "Daisy, if you do that, he could go to jail." "He committed a crime," I said flatly, "a premeditated crime. He planned this, executed it, lied about it, and laughed about it afterward. Why shouldn't he face the consequences?" "Because he's our father," Patrick said desperately. "Because once you do this, there's no going back. The family will never forgive you." "The family?" I repeated. "You mean Mom and Dad? The people who stole from me and laughed about it? I don't need their forgiveness, Patrick. I need my dignity back." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the struggle playing out across his face. The conflict between what he was being taught by his parents and what he was beginning to understand was right. "I understand," he finally said. "I don't agree, but I understand. Vanessa and I will bring your appliances back tomorrow morning," he continued, "all of them in their original condition. We'll help you install them if you want, but I need you to know. I'm also willing to give you a written statement, notarized, confirming that Dad told us the appliances were a gift from you and that we had no knowledge they were taken without your permission. I want it notarized." "Done," Patrick said. Anything else? Yes, I said. I want you to think about why you were so quick to believe I was in the wrong. Why your first instinct was to threaten me instead of questioning Dad's story. I want you to think about how you've treated me our entire lives, and whether you actually want to be better or if you're just scared of losing Vanessa. He flinched like I had hit him. That's fair. After he left, I called Gregory and updated him on the situation. He was pleased about the appliances being returned, but cautious about the rest. The criminal charges are still viable, he said. The fact that they're returning the property doesn't erase the crime, but it will be harder to prosecute if you have your items back. He paused. But Daisy, prepare yourself. This is about to get much worse before it gets better. Patrick and Vanessa arrived at 7 in the morning the next day with a moving truck. I watched from my window as they unloaded box after box, each one containing a piece of my stolen property. Vanessa looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she had not slept well. Patrick looked worse, haggard, guilty, bearing the weight of confronting his own complicity in what had been done to me. I let them in when they knocked. Vanessa spoke first, her voice gentle and sincere. I'm so sorry this happened to you. If I had known, I would have made Patrick return them immediately. I believe you, I said. And I did. They spent 4 hours reinstalling every appliance exactly where it had been. The espresso machine back on the counter, the wine cooler in its designated spot, the refrigerator humming quietly in the corner, the range with its pristine burners, the dishwasher that closed smoothly and properly. I watched them work, feeling something untie in my chest, feeling the violation begin to be undone piece by piece. When they finished, Patrick handed me an envelope. The notarized statement you wanted. We both signed it. I opened it and read carefully. It was exactly what I had asked for. A clear statement that they had been told the appliances were my gift, that they had no knowledge of the theft, that they were returning the property in its original condition, verified by a notary public. Thank you, I said. Vanessa touched my arm gently. I hope someday we can have a real relationship, sister to sister. I'd like that. I'd like that too, I said, surprising myself by meaning it. I meant it because she had chosen to do the right thing, because she had refused to enable my brother's worst impulses, because she had the clarity to see what was right, even when it was complicated by family ties. After they left, I made coffee in my espresso machine, real coffee, perfect and rich, and exactly the way I liked it. I stood in my restored kitchen and felt something like peace settle over me. Real peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of rightness. The knowledge that I had done what I needed to do, that my space was being restored, that the violation was being undone. Then my phone rang. My mother. I answered, steadying myself for what I knew was coming. Patrick told me he returned the appliances, she said, her voice tight. I hope you're satisfied now. You've gotten what you wanted. Now drop the charges against your father. No, I said simply. What do you mean, no? You have your precious appliances back. There's no reason to pursue this further. He committed a crime, I said. Returning the stolen property doesn't change that. He needs to face consequences. You're going to send your father to jail over a misunderstanding? Her voice rose to a near shriek, the pitch suggesting she was becoming increasingly desperate. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated theft. He planned it. He executed it. He lied about it. And he laughed about it afterward. I know because Patrick heard you. Silence. Then in a cold voice I had never heard from her before. Patrick had no right to tell you about a private conversation. Patrick had every right to tell me that you were mocking me for being naive enough to trust my own father, I shot back. You know what the worst part is? Not the theft itself. It's that you thought it was funny. You thought stealing from me was amusing. We were just blowing off steam, my mother said defensively. You were threatening us with lawyers. We were upset. I was threatening you with lawyers because you stole from me, I said, each word precise and hard. And instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a shred of remorse, you laughed. You called me naive. You planned to just wait me out because you thought I would back down like I always do. Daisy, please, my mother said, and now she was crying. Please don't do this. Your father made a mistake. He knows that now. But criminal charges, that will destroy him. It will destroy this family. You destroyed this family, I said quietly, when you chose to treat me like I don't matter, when you chose Patrick over me again and again, when you stole from me and expected me to just accept it. We love you, she sobbed. We've always loved you. No, I said. You loved the version of me that didn't make waves, the version that accepted being overlooked, the version that worked hard and achieved things you could brag about but never actually valued. You loved me as long as I stayed in my place, but I'm not that person anymore. I hung up and immediately called Gregory. They're panicking. My mother just called, begging me to drop the charges. Good, he said with grim satisfaction. Let them panic. The district attorney's office called this morning. They're moving forward with the case. Your father will be formally charged within the week. What does that mean? I asked. It means he'll be arrested, arraigned, and offered a plea deal or go to trial. Given that he returned the property, he'll probably be offered probation and restitution, but it will go on his permanent record. He'll have a criminal conviction. The weight of that settled over me. My father would have a criminal record because of me, because I had refused to back down. Was that wrong? The question haunted me, but I pushed it aside. The criminal charges were filed, and that was when the extended family called. Aunts and uncles I barely spoke to, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all of them with the same message. How could I do this to my father? How could I be so cruel? Didn't I understand what this would do to him? Not one of them asked what he had done to me. I stopped answering the phone. I blocked numbers. I made my social media private after my aunt posted a long, vicious screed about ungrateful children who destroy their families over material possessions. The comment section filled with relatives I hadn't thought about in decades, all agreeing that I was selfish, cruel, heartless. Victoria came over that night with wine and takeout. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm being disowned by people I barely knew existed, I said, scrolling through the block numbers on my phone. Apparently, I'm the worst daughter in history. You're the daughter who refused to be stolen from, Victoria corrected sharply. That's different. Is it though? I asked, genuine uncertainty creeping in. Everyone seems to think I've gone too far, that I should have just accepted the apology and moved on. What apology? Victoria asked sharply. Have your parents actually apologized? I thought about it. My mother had cried and begged, but she had never said the words, I'm sorry. My father had sent increasingly angry messages about how I was destroying the family, but none of them had included an apology. Patrick had apologized, but only after Vanessa forced him to see the truth. No, I said slowly, they haven't. Then what exactly are you supposed to accept? They stole from you, mocked you for trusting them, and are now playing the victim because you dared to hold them accountable. That's not something you forgive and move on from. That's something that requires actual remorse and change. She was right. I knew she was right. But the weight of family disapproval was heavier than I had anticipated. I had expected my parents to fight back. I hadn't expected the entire extended family to rally around them, to treat me like the villain in this story. What if I'm wrong? I asked quietly. What if I am being cruel? Victoria sat down her wine and took my hands. Listen to me. You are not wrong. You are not cruel. You are holding someone accountable for a crime they committed against you. The fact that they're your father doesn't change the fundamental reality that what he did was wrong. And the fact that your family is attacking you instead of supporting you tells you everything you need to know about their values. I squeezed her hands, grateful for her presence, grateful for someone who saw things clearly and wasn't afraid to speak the truth. "Thank you," I said. "Always." "Now eat some Chinese food and tell me about work," she said. "I want to hear about literally anything other than your terrible family." Work had become my refuge. The clinical trial was progressing well, and Judith had formally recommended me for the senior coordinator position. In my professional life, I was valued, respected, trusted with increasing responsibility. It was such a stark contrast to my family dynamics that sometimes I felt like I was living two completely different lives, one where I mattered and one where I didn't. The arraignment happened on a Monday morning. Gregory had suggested I attend, so I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched my father stand before a judge. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, diminished somehow by the reality of legal proceedings. His lawyer argued for dismissal based on the return of the property, but the prosecutor pushed back hard. The defendant used his access to his daughter's home to commit premeditated theft, she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. He took $18,500 worth of property, replaced it with damaged items worth a fraction of that value, and attempted to cover up the theft by claiming it was a gift. This was not a family dispute. This was a crime. The judge agreed. My father was formally charged with felony theft. Bail was set at $10,000. He would face trial unless he accepted a plea deal. I watched him sign the paperwork, watched my mother cry in the front row, watched him avoid looking in my direction, even though he must have known I was there. Their confidence cracked the moment legal notices started arriving, and suddenly, the bold entitlement they had relied on began to crumble. When my father's lawyer tried to argue that this was a family matter that should be settled privately, the judge shut him down immediately. The victim has the right to pursue criminal charges regardless of her relationship to the defendant. The court will not dismiss valid charges simply because they make the defendant's family uncomfortable. I left the courthouse feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks: validation. A neutral third party, someone with no stake in my family dynamics, had looked at the situation and agreed that what happened to me was wrong, that I wasn't overreacting, that I deserved justice. My phone buzzed, a text from Patrick. I was there. I saw, "I'm sorry, Daisy, for everything." I typed back, "Thank you." Another text from Vanessa. "We're here if you need us. You're not alone." I wasn't alone. I had Victoria. I had Gregory. I had my career. I had my restored apartment with my beautiful appliances. I had people who valued me, who supported me, who didn't demand I make myself smaller to accommodate their comfort. And I had something else: self-respect, the knowledge that I was worth fighting for, worth standing up for, worth protecting. The plea deal came 2 weeks later. My father would plead guilty to misdemeanor theft, serve 1 year of probation, pay full restitution of $18,500 plus my legal fees, and complete 100 hours of community service. It would go on his permanent record. He would have a criminal conviction. Gregory called to tell me. He took it. He'll be formally sentenced next month, but it's done. You won. I won. The words should have felt triumphant, but mostly I just felt tired. The sentencing hearing was brief. My father stood before the judge, his lawyer beside him, and accepted his punishment. The judge was not gentle. "Mr. James, you violated your daughter's trust in the worst possible way," she said, her voice stern. "You used your access to her home to steal valuable property, then attempted to justify that theft by claiming family obligation. This court finds your actions reprehensible. The sentence reflects not just the monetary value of what you took, but the breach of trust that accompanied it." My father nodded, his face pale. My mother sobbed in the front row. I sat in the back, watching it unfold with a strange sense of detachment. When it was over, when my father had been formally sentenced and the courtroom began to clear, he finally looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since this whole thing began. His expression was complex: shame, anger, hurt, defeat. I stood up and walked past him without responding. There was nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, Vanessa was waiting. She had attended the hearing with Patrick, who looked shaken. "Are you okay?" she asked me. "I think so," I said. "Are you?" She nodded. Patrick and I have been in therapy working through a lot of things about his family dynamics and his role in them. It's been hard, but good. "I'm glad," I said, meaning it. Patrick approached cautiously. "Daisy, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm working on being better, on understanding how I contributed to the way you were treated. Vanessa is helping me see things I couldn't see before." "That's good, Patrick," I said. "I hope you mean it." "I do," he said. And I could see in his expression that he was genuinely trying, that he was doing the work of understanding his own complicity, that he was attempting to become someone better than the person he had been. "Maybe someday we can have a real relationship," he continued, "but I understand if you don't want that." I studied him, my brother who had been my competitor and my rival and my co-conspirator in my parents' games. He looked different now, less cocky, more uncertain, maybe a little more real. "Maybe someday," I said. "But not now, I need time." He nodded, accepting that boundary without pushing, understanding that I had given what I could give in that moment. As the situation resolved in my favor and the boundaries finally stuck, I walked away from all of them knowing I would never look back. Not in anger, not in regret, but in the simple knowledge that some chapters needed to close completely before new ones could begin. The restitution check arrived a month later, $18,500 plus $12,000 in legal fees. I deposited it and immediately donated the $18,000 to a women's legal defense fund. I didn't need the money. What I had needed was the principle, the acknowledgement, the boundary. At work, I was promoted to senior coordinator. Judith took me out to celebrate at a small restaurant downtown, just the two of us. "I'm proud of you," she said, raising her glass of water. "Not just for the promotion, but for everything. I know this year has been difficult." "It has," I admitted, "but I think I'm better for it." "You are," she said. "You set boundaries. You stood up for yourself. You didn't let people who claim to love you treat you as lesser. Those are skills that will serve you well, both personally and professionally." We clinked glasses, and I felt, for the first time in months, genuinely happy. Not the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet contentment of knowing my worth and demanding others recognize it too. My parents never apologized. The extended family eventually stopped calling, stopped posting about me on social media, stopped trying to make me the villain. They simply wrote me off as the daughter who destroyed the family, the cold one who chose material possessions over love. Let them think that. I knew the truth. I knew that I had chosen self-respect over abuse, boundaries over manipulation, justice over false peace. I knew that the appliances had never been the real issue. They had been the concrete, undeniable proof of something I had always known but never been able to name. That my family saw me as less than, as someone whose needs and feelings didn't matter as much as maintaining their comfortable delusions. Patrick and Vanessa stayed in touch. Small texts at first, then occasional coffee meetups. They were genuinely trying to change, to build a relationship with me based on respect rather than obligation. I appreciated the effort, even if I wasn't ready to fully trust it yet. Victoria remained my rock, my chosen family, the sister I had never had. She celebrated my victories and supported me through the difficult moments, never once suggesting I should have handled things differently. 6 months after the sentencing, my father attempted to reach out. A letter arrived, handwritten, full of explanations and justifications and carefully worded non-apologies. He was sorry I had been hurt. He wished things had gone differently. He hoped someday I would understand that he had only been trying to help Patrick. I read it once, then shredded it. Understanding was not the same as acceptance, and his perspective was not my responsibility to validate. My life continued, better than before. I traveled. I pursued hobbies I had neglected while focused on building my career and my apartment. I invested in friendships with people who actually valued me. My career flourished. My apartment remained my sanctuary. My beautiful appliances became a daily reminder that I was worth fighting for. In the months that followed, my father's conviction became local knowledge in his small social circle. The community service hours he completed at a food bank meant facing questions from volunteers and staff who had heard about his case. His longtime friends from the golf club grew distant, their invitations drying up once word spread about why he had a criminal record. The shame he had tried to avoid by stealing quietly had multiplied 100-fold through the legal process. My mother, who had laughed about my naivety, found herself increasingly isolated as other mothers in her social groups quietly questioned her judgment. The narrative they had tried to control, the ungrateful daughter destroying her family, crumbled as people learned the facts. Premeditated theft, returned property, criminal conviction. Their reputation, which they had valued above my well-being, lay in ruins of their own making. As for me, I built a life defined not by what had been taken from me, but by what I had reclaimed. My dignity, my voice, my absolute refusal to accept less than I deserved. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand in my kitchen making perfect espresso in the machine I had saved for, and think about the daughter I used to be, the one who made herself small, who swallowed hurt, who prioritized family peace over her own worth. She was gone now, replaced by someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more free. I never regretted the path I chose, never doubted that justice had been the right response to betrayal, and I carried forward the knowledge that justice, when it is really the enforcement of boundaries long violated, can taste exactly like the freedom it is. The story I have shared with you is not ultimately about appliances, though the appliances served as the perfect symbol for a larger truth about family dynamics, entitlement, and the cost of setting boundaries. It is a story about learning your own worth and refusing to compromise it for the sake of maintaining relationships with people who have fundamentally undervalued you. It is a story about the difference between forgiveness and accepting victimization, between maintaining family connections and protecting your own well-being. The journey from the woman standing in her kitchen feeling pride in her accomplishments to the woman standing in that same kitchen feeling violated by theft was not just a story of criminal action, though that is certainly part of it. It was a story of finally reaching the breaking point, of saying no to the accumulated dismissals and diminishments that had characterized my relationship with my family throughout my entire life. Many people who face similar situations never reach that breaking point. They continue to swallow their hurt, continue to make themselves small, continue to accept being treated as less than in order to maintain family peace. This is understandable. The pressure to maintain family relationships is immense. The cultural messaging that you should prioritize family loyalty regardless of how you are treated is powerful. And the fear of being cut off or ostracized is real and legitimate. But the price of that choice is enormous. It is the price of your own dignity, of your own self-respect, of the knowledge that you matter and that your needs and feelings are legitimate and worthy of consideration. It is the price of teaching people who claim to love you that they can treat you with disrespect, and you will accept it, that they can violate your trust, and you will continue to trust them, that they can steal from you, and you will eventually forgive them without requiring any genuine change or remorse. I chose a different path. I chose to fight back. I chose to pursue legal action despite the personal costs, despite the family consequences, despite the social isolation that resulted. And that choice, while difficult, was absolutely the right one. Not because I needed revenge. I didn't. Not because I wanted to hurt my father, I didn't want that either, but because I needed to establish irrevocably that there were real consequences for treating me poorly, that I was not an acceptable target for manipulation and theft, that my boundaries were not something people could cross without facing consequences. The resolution I achieved was not perfect. My father still has not genuinely apologized. My mother still does not understand what she did wrong. The extended family still views me as the villain in this story. But that is their limitation, not mine. I have learned that I cannot control how other people choose to see me or treat me. I can only control whether I accept that treatment and whether I establish boundaries about what I will tolerate going forward. My advice to anyone reading this who is in a similar situation is to take your own worth seriously. Do not minimize the harm that has been done to you just because it came from family. Do not accept the narrative that you should swallow hurt for the sake of maintaining relationships with people who have shown they do not actually value you. Do not believe the suggestion that setting boundaries is selfish or cruel. It is actually the most healthy and reasonable thing you can do. Get support. Find people who value you, who see your worth clearly, who will stand beside you when you make difficult decisions. Build professional relationships where your competence is recognized and appreciated. Invest in friendships with people who treat you with respect. These connections will sustain you when your family relationships are difficult or non-existent. Document everything. Keep receipts. Take photographs. Create records of what has been done to you. These documents can be invaluable if you need to pursue legal action, but they also serve another purpose. They give you concrete evidence that what you experienced actually happened, that you are not crazy for being upset, that the violation was real and significant. Be prepared for the consequences of standing up for yourself. Your family may respond with anger, with guilt-tripping, with attempts to isolate you from other family members. People in your social circle may judge you for pursuing legal action against a family member. Some people will view you as selfish or cruel for refusing to accept victimization quietly. This is the cost of choosing dignity over false peace. It is worth paying. Finally, trust that the right choice, even when it is the difficult choice, will eventually become clear to you. There will be moments when you question whether you made the right decision, when the weight of family disapproval becomes heavy, when the isolation feels profound. In those moments, remember that you are fighting for something fundamental: your right to be treated with respect, your right to not be stolen from, your right to boundaries and dignity, and self-respect. That is a fight worth having. That is a fight worth winning. And it is a fight that changes you, transforms you from someone who accepts victimization into someone who refuses it, from someone who prioritizes others' comfort into someone who prioritizes her own well-being. That transformation is the real victory in this story. The appliances were just the symbol. My freedom was the prize. The story I have shared with you is not ultimately about appliances, though the appliances served as the perfect symbol for a larger truth about family dynamics, entitlement, and the cost of setting boundaries. It is a story about learning your own worth and refusing to compromise it for the sake of maintaining relationships with people who have fundamentally undervalued you. It is a story about the difference between forgiveness and accepting victimization, between maintaining family connections and protecting your own well-being. The journey from the woman standing in her kitchen, feeling pride in her accomplishments, to the woman standing in that same kitchen, feeling violated by theft, was not just a story of criminal action, though that is certainly part of it. It was a story of finally reaching the breaking point, of saying no to the accumulated dismissals and diminishments that had characterized my relationship with my family throughout my entire life. Many people who face similar situations never reach that breaking point. They continue to swallow their hurt, continue to make themselves small, continue to accept being treated as less than in order to maintain family peace. This is understandable. The pressure to maintain family relationships is immense. The cultural messaging that you should prioritize family loyalty regardless of how you are treated is powerful, and the fear of being cut off or ostracized is real and legitimate. But the price of that choice is enormous. It is the price of your own dignity, of your own self-respect, of the knowledge that you matter and that your needs and feelings are legitimate and worthy of consideration. It is the price of teaching people who claim to love you that they can treat you with disrespect and you will accept it, that they can violate your trust and you will continue to trust them, that they can steal from you and you will eventually forgive them without requiring any genuine change or remorse. I chose a different path. I chose to fight back. I chose to pursue legal action despite the personal costs, despite the family consequences, despite the social isolation that resulted. And that choice, while difficult, was absolutely the right one. Not because I needed revenge, I didn't. Not because I wanted to hurt my father, I didn't want that either, but because I needed to establish irrevocably that there were real consequences for treating me poorly, that I was not an acceptable target for manipulation and theft, that my boundaries were not something people could cross without facing consequences. The resolution I achieved was not perfect. My father still has not genuinely apologized. My mother still does not understand what she did wrong. The extended family still views me as the villain in this story. But that is their limitation, not mine. I have learned that I cannot control how other people choose to see me or treat me. I can only control whether I accept that treatment and whether I establish boundaries about what I will tolerate going forward. My advice to anyone reading this who is in a similar situation is to take your own worth seriously. Do not minimize the harm that has been done to you just because it came from family. Do not accept the narrative that you should swallow hurt for the sake of maintaining relationships with people who have shown they do not actually value you. Do not believe the suggestion that setting boundaries is selfish or cruel. It is actually the most healthy and reasonable thing you can do. Get support. Find people who value you, who see your worth clearly, who will stand beside you when you make difficult decisions. Build professional relationships where your competence is recognized and appreciated. Invest in friendships with people who treat you with respect. These connections will sustain you when your family relationships are difficult or non-existent. Document everything. Keep receipts. Take photographs. Create records of what has been done to you. These documents can be invaluable if you need to pursue legal action, but they also serve another purpose. They give you concrete evidence that what you experienced actually happened, that you are not crazy for being upset, that the violation was real and significant. Be prepared for the consequences of standing up for yourself. Your family may respond with anger, with guilt-tripping, with attempts to isolate you from other family members. People in your social circle may judge you for pursuing legal action against a family member. Some people will view you as selfish or cruel for refusing to accept victimization quietly. This is the cost of choosing dignity over false peace. It is worth paying. Finally, trust that the right choice, even when it is the difficult choice, will eventually become clear to you. There will be moments when you question whether you made the right decision, when the weight of family disapproval becomes heavy, when the isolation feels profound. In those moments, remember that you are fighting for something fundamental: your right to be treated with respect, your right to not be stolen from, your right to boundaries and dignity and self-respect. That is a fight worth having. That is a fight worth winning. And it is a fight that changes you, transforms you from someone who accepts victimization into someone who refuses it, from someone who prioritizes others' comfort into someone who prioritizes her own well-being. That transformation is the real victory in this story. The appliances were just the symbol. My freedom was the prize.